Alrighty then. Hello, welcome to the Roleplayers Survival Guide. My name is Dodge, and the next 45 odd minutes, I'm going to be doing my best to get you into my favorite hobby in the most efficient and safe way possible. Now, don't laugh. There are some things for safety we're talking about, and we're going to get to that. Now, first of all, I'd like to give you a little overview of what we're going to be talking about today. This talk is going to be split up into basically 3 parts. First, I'm going to give a little introduction to people who may not be very familiar with what I'm talking about. Talk about a couple of the words I'll be using. Afterwards, I'm not going to let you wait. I'm going to get right to the heart of the issue. I'm going to talk about what I like to call the central problem of RP. This is the most important part of this talk. If you take anything home at all, just please, if you have something better to do, stick around for that part. That's the good part. That's the one that I really think will be the most useful to you. After that, we're going to take a little breather, talk about some tips and tricks that I've learned over the years, both in general for any kind of RPG game you might be playing, and pony specific. Now, before I really get started, I'd like to mention 2 things. The first thing I'd like to mention is that nothing I say is law. This, like any other kind of artistic or social activity, your experience will differ from mine. I can only tell you what I've experienced and what worked for me, and maybe it'll work for you as well. But take everything I say with a grain of salt. The other thing is that I could literally talk about almost every topic in this talk for hours on end. And of course, you don't have the time for that. So I'm doing my best to keep things short, succinct, and actionable in there for you, so they can actually improve your game if possible. If you want the full unabridged version, I don't know, buy me a couple of drinks afterwards, and I will rant to you all night, promise. So, without further ado, let's get going. So, the first big question is, what is RP? Before I do that, I would like a quick show of hands. Who among you have played some kind of RPG game of some sort? Oh wow, okay, that's quite a lot. Okay, well, that's pretty good. Who of you have played a pen and paper game specifically? Okay, good. I know, good to know my audience. So I won't have to talk about that as long. All right, but for those that don't know, RP, not necessarily RPGs, but the act of RP, of role-playing, I like to call it scriptless acting. It's like acting in a theater or something, but you don't have a script. No one is exactly telling you what your character feels, says, or does. Instead, you are tasked to improvise using your knowledge of the character and the situation they're presented with. RPG is basically an RPG and a role-playing game, as the name implies, is any game that enrolls role-playing. For this talk, I know there's a lot of games nowadays, especially video games, that call themselves RPGs that actually do not really involve much RPing at all. The word has kind of changed in that regard, but for our uses, this is what it is. Now, these are my words. These aren't words that a lot of people use. I like to differentiate between structured and unstructured RP. And what structured RP is what you usually think of when you think of an RPG game. You have stuff like Dungeons & Dragons, Tales of Equestria. This basically means that you have rules of some sort. You have some kind of rules. You might have a referee, a game master of some sort that decides what is being played. Unstructured RP are the embarrassing memories you have when you were 14 on IRC. Don't pretend you didn't do it. Don't. We all have those memories, and we're not proud of them. I don't recommend unstructured RP, which means just rule-less, just writing whatever comes to mind with your friends. It can be fun, it can work, blah, 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 but yeah, it can devolve into chaos pretty quickly, and just not lead anywhere. I'm not going to be talking about unstructured RP very much in this talk, if at all, because there's basically nothing I can tell you about it, because it's much closer to traditional prose writing. There's no rules for you to follow. You just do whatever the hell you want. So whenever I talk about RPGs in context of this talk, I'm always going to be talking about structured RPs of some kind. So one of the most interesting things that I would like to bring up right here is that role-playing is a surprisingly natural thing. And I mean, I have an audience that is quite experienced in that regard, so you know what I'm talking about. It can sometimes seem like it's difficult or weird, especially when it's explained to you the first time. But you would be surprised how quickly you can get into it. RPing is a really fun thing, and especially new players are often very surprised by this. I even like to sometimes call it the first-time player syndrome. I've seen this a lot of times, that I'll introduce a player to an RPG, and I'll make a very, very simple little story, just a little something simple, nothing complicated, and they will be ecstatic. They'll have so much fun, and they'll be like, oh, when can we play next? It was so great, it was so much fun. They're often really surprised. I mean, for me, I basically say our ancestors have been doing RPs of some sort forever. sitting around the fire, telling each other stories, imagining what it's like to be in another land, to be a hero, whatever it is. It's a very human activity in a way. It's just it comes very natural if you actually give it a try. I'd like to quickly clarify a couple words. I know it's probably not necessary here, so I'll go over this quickly. A pen and paper game is the archetypical structured RP. You have a pen and you write stuff on paper, as the name implies. This usually means your character, maybe his equipment, stats, and stuff like that. This includes all of the big games you've heard about: Dungeons & Dragons, Call of Cthulhu, Pathfinder, Tales of Equestria. All the big RPG games you've heard about tend to fall into this category. There are other kinds as well. We don't have time to talk about those, I'm afraid. The two words that I want to talk about is that there's two roles you can have in a game like this. You can be a player, who has a player character, also called a PC. I'm going to use that word a couple times probably. That basically means that you have the role of a person in the story. Most players in a typical pen and paper game are players with a player character. There is usually one, sometimes more, but almost always one, special player, which is sometimes called the game master, the GM. I'm going to mention it a couple times. Also, just to say it, I sometimes call it a dungeon master or a DM, because that's what it's called in Dungeons & Dragons. It's just a habit, it's hard to kick. I'll try to say GM, but that's what I mean. Basically, the GM is everything that the players aren't. He describes the world, the monsters, the things the players encounter, the other people, and so on. So to give you a quick idea of how this usually works, well, how does a pen and paper run? First, you create a character using the rule set. So we say, okay, let's play Dungeons & Dragons, and then you have your books that tell you how to create a character. You might decide, oh, I want to play a wizard, I want to play a fighter, whatever fits the story you're telling. Then you sit down together at the game table with each player having a character, and the GM narrates a scene. For example, you're going through a dark forest and you hear a rustling in a bush. What do you want to do? The players then narrate their actions. They might say, oh, I grab my sword and take a closer look and see if I can spot anything, or I run away, or something else entirely. That's basically the fun part, is that you're pretty free in what you can do. Optionally, some dice are rolled at this time. This is especially if you're trying to do something that might be difficult or random. So for example, if the character decided, okay, I'm going to go into the bush and see if I can find something, the GM might say, okay, roll for perception. And there's going to be certain rules for that, and you roll some dice, and if you roll high, you might spot the monster, or if you roll low, you might not. And repeat. That's basically how pen and papers work. So, I promised you I'm not going to bullshit you. Get right to the point. You have other things to do. So, I'm going to talk about what I think is the most important thing. In all of my years as a GM, as a player, this is the biggest lesson I have learned, by far. And I have surprisingly rarely heard other people talk about this. There are other people. But surprisingly little, considering how big, huge of a problem this is. So, please just stick with me for this part. I'm pretty sure this will be useful to you. So, what is this big problem I've been hyping up all this time? Oh, where am I going with this? Well, the big problem with role-playing games is the vast majority of role-playing games are not actually games. Okay, I'm gonna have to explain that. Let's take a step back. RP is art, and I take that as a statement of truth. Role-playing, just like any other creative activity, whether it's writing, painting, making movies, whatever it is, it's a creative endeavor. It's creating art of some form. I mean, whether you think it's good art or not, I mean, that's up to you. But it is art. It is a creative endeavor. Art has no rules. I absolutely believe this, and I reject any school of thought that thinks otherwise. I think you can create any art that you want, and you do not have to justify yourself to anybody. You can go into your room, sit in your computer, and write a story about anything in the world you want. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't have to like your story. I might think it's stupid, but that's fine. I might write a story that you think is stupid, and that's fine. But here's the problem. Role-playing game, by their very definition, are a social activity. You can't really RP on your own, because if you do, well, you're not role-playing, you're just writing. So by the very definition of the term, you have to do with other people, and that creates a problem. Normally in art, you don't have any responsibility towards anyone. You don't have to justify yourself to anybody. But here, you do. You have a responsibility towards your fellow players. And this is important. It means that just because you like a certain idea doesn't necessarily mean the others might, and that can lead to trouble. Games work because they have rules. A game without rules is not a game. This is why I don't recommend unstructured RP. And what are rules other than a contract, an understanding, an agreement between the players that this is what we're going to play, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. The overwhelming majority of RPGs, rule sets aren't really full rule sets. They're partial rule sets. They're tools. They're useful things. You can create a game with them, and they're very powerful for doing so. But they are not. There are exceptions, but for the vast majority and all the big ones, they are not actually games. Let me give you an example of what I mean by this. So, you and your friends decide to play cards. So you all sit down at the table. One starts playing poker, the second one starts playing Go Fish, the third one, and so on. None of you is going to be happy. None of you is going to get the game they actually want. You're all going to be disappointed. But you're all playing cards, right? And that's the heart of the problem. When we sit down and I say, hey guys, we're going to play Dungeons and Dragons together, that doesn't really tell you much of anything about what we're going to be playing. Is it going to be a complicated, deep political intrigue, or are we just going to be killing monsters for the fun of it? Those are two very different games for two very different types of people. And I have to know that to know if it's for me or not. The problem is, at its heart, communication. As in any other social activity on this planet, communication is the key. How can we all agree to work together to create what it is we want? Again, what it is we want to create. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. You can go play a pen and paper by being Thomas the Tank Engine. I don't care. You can do anything you want. The only important thing is that you and your friends agreed to work on it. Sadly, there is a pathological lack of both awareness and vocabulary about this problem. What I mean by this is many people aren't even aware that this is a thing, that this is a problem that could occur when they go into a game. And even if they are aware of it, they often can't put into words what the problem is. I'll talk about that again in a second. This sadly leads to a fact that I think any experienced pen and paper gamer can confirm to you. Group breakups can be surprisingly fierce and really end some friendships. And that is quite surprising to a lot of people, how much you can get on each other's nerves and really get into fights. And it comes down to the communication. Okay, well, that's depressing. Now what? Well, sad news is there is no general solution. If there was a general solution to this problem, it would be a general solution to being social, which obviously there couldn't be. People are complicated, people are unique. There's always going to be different situations. But there are some ways to mitigate and preempt some of the problems that I'd like to share with you that I think could at least ease the problem. Now, this here, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to present to you, is the most important slide in this entire talk. You can leave after this if you want to, I don't care. This is the one I would like you to remember. I'm now going to share with you the secret, how to be an amazing RPGer. Are you ready? Step 1, know what you want. Step 2, communicate what you want. And step 0, accept that not everyone will want what you want. If you can do these things, step 0 is just basic. You just have that respect for your fellow people. That's just basic. But if you can do this, and this is not easy, it might seem easy, it might even seem blatantly obvious. This is not easy. You can do this. You are in the top leagues of RPGers, and you're going to have a lot of fun. I promise you that. At the end of the day, you have a responsibility. Whether you're a player or a GM, to some degree, it is your responsibility to make sure that not only you, but all the people around you also have fun. And it applies to everyone else as well. It's also partially their responsibility that you have fun. It's a social activity. You have to work together. Whatever it is you want, again, I would like to stress this. That's fine. Doesn't matter. I don't have to like the kind of game you like. You might have an idea of what a good RPG is that I think is completely stupid. That's perfectly fine. I might have an idea that you think is completely stupid. That's fine. As long as we talk about it and find the right time and place. If I have an idea for a game that you think is stupid, I shouldn't force it onto you because it's not for you. I have to find someone else to play with. Be as respecting of other people's wishes as they should be of yours. This is just basic for me. But you'd be surprised how often people can get pretty nasty about this kind of stuff. I'd like to mention this, that just please, don't fall into snobbish and just plain out intellectually dishonest elitism. I see this sadly very often in the role-playing game community. People that say you're playing the game wrong. Not just you're not good at it, you're doing it wrong. That's not how you play, that's wrong. I see this so often and it drives me mad because it's not true. There is no such thing as playing wrong. It's just playing different. If you just want to kill monsters and not think about anything, that doesn't mean you're a bad player. It doesn't mean you're a bad RP or just, oh, you don't appreciate how to do it correctly. No, it just means you want to play a different kind of game. And that's fine. We just have to communicate. We just have to understand what it is you want and what it is I want. And if they agree, well, we can work together. Of course, there's a caveat. No one knows what they want, including you. You think you know what you want. You do not know what you want. I don't know what I want. I think about this problem, I think, quite a lot more than the average person, and I still am surprised sometimes by what is fun for me or is not for me. This means sometimes you have to try things out, and you're not going to like some of these things. This is just natural. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with, giving something a try and finding out, well, this wasn't for me. This didn't work out. And I do recommend that you do this. You should definitely go out of your comfort zone sometimes. Try something new, see if you like it. That's how you find the greatest things in life. But you need to be aware of this problem. You need to be aware that you might not like it. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. And even more importantly, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with the game that you were playing. Know when to leave and leave respectfully. That's the message I have. You find out a game, you've been playing it for a while, you're just not having fun. It's not for you. Just be respectful. Don't say this game is shit and I want to go, this is stupid, I hate it. Just say, guys, I'm glad you're having fun, but this just isn't for me. And vice versa, of course, if you have a player or someone that wants to leave your game, you should be as respectful of them as well. And just say, well, okay, that's fine. It's just not for you. Nothing wrong with that. Doesn't mean you can't be friends anymore. Doesn't mean you have to fight about it. It's just not for you. That's how it is. So, what is the cure for the central problem of RPG? Number one, vision. Have a clear vision of what your game is about. Again, I can't stress this enough. It does not matter what your vision is. It doesn't matter if it's complicated, if it's simple, if it's serious, if it's goofy. It doesn't matter. The only important thing is that you have a clear vision of it. Second, communication. Make sure that everyone understands the vision that you have. Everyone has to share the vision. And of course, agreement. You have to agree that this is the vision that you guys want and you want to work together to create. Not being a dick helps too. Just a little tip. Boom! Congratulations, everybody. You are one of the best RPers in the entire world. When do you want to set up a game? So, that was a lot, I know. It was pretty quick. So I'll just take a little moment here, take a step back, calm down a bit. What we just talked about is the most important thing. And really, I could end the talk here, in my opinion. But there are some more fun things that I would like to talk about, interesting things that seem as bite-sized advices. I've made a lot of mistakes in my days, and maybe I can help you avoid making some of the same mistakes I did. I mean, after all, that's what a guide is, right? Someone who makes lots of mistakes and lives to tell the tale. As one of my favorite chemistry quotes goes, remember that all those warnings on those chemicals were at some point found out the hard way. So, here are some tips that I just generally recommend for everybody. This is very important, especially for it's probably not as relevant for this audience, but for new players. The players and the GM are not playing against each other. This is a common misconception I see with very new players. Just because the Dungeon Master, the GM, controls the monsters and the villains and whatever, doesn't mean he's playing against you. You're playing together. You and the GM are all working together to create a fun story for all of you. You're not enemies. Never think in this pattern. Good RP takes time. I can't stress this enough. This applies doubly, triply, quadruply if you decide to RP over text, which is something I wish I had more time to talk about. Text RP is quite interesting. I usually do not recommend to plan less than around 4-ish hours for a pen and paper or RP session because you need some time to get into the groove, you need to get some time to settle down, so take your time. One of the simplest pieces of advice I can give you is, get a real set of dice. I'm serious. They cost $10 on Amazon, you can basically use them forever. get real dice. Yes, there are rolling apps on phones nowadays and stuff, and those have their use, they do. But there's something just pleasing about having some dice in your hand, rolling them on the table. They just increase the experience. This is one of the easiest, cheapest things you can do to increase the quality of your game. Just get some real dice. A little tip I'll give to dungeon masters and players alike. Don't cram everything into your first story. This is something I've done, I am very guilty of, that you're playing your first character or your second or whatever, or your first game, and you have all these great ideas in your head. You have all these different ideas, lots and lots of great ideas, and they're good ideas. And you try to do them all at once. Don't do that. Stay on topic. Pick 1 or 2 stories, do that. You will have another time, I promise you. At some point, you will find another group, another game, where you can do those other great ideas. You have time. Now, I'd like to take a couple of moments to talk about a topic that you often hear in the context of creative arts. Well, how do you become creative? Where do you get your ideas from? Now, again, there is no simple answer to that, of course. But there are a few things I would like to say. The first one is that life experience is the fuel of creativity. I truly believe that. Go outside, read a book, watch a movie, go to a foreign country, try a new hobby. These are the things that will fuel your creativity. Inspiration can come from literally anywhere. In one of my last adventures, a lot of the inspiration from all places came from math. I was studying math and I came up with all these cool ideas from it. I didn't ever expect that, but it turned out pretty fun. And another important part is there is no such thing as originality. Seriously, people keep saying this, there is no such thing. Steal everything. But don't do it unmodified. There's nothing wrong with copying a story that works or an idea, but always put a twist on it. Never wholesale just copy something. Take the best parts, get out the bad parts, add your own little flair. That's how you create a story. Now, the great American writer, Ernest Hemingway, I would like to quote him here, because he has a very important thing to say about creativity. What he has, and his quote was, "The first draft of anything is shit." And this is very true. There is this myth that inspiration is what's important, that what separates the artist from the other people is the God-given inspiration, these fully formed ideas created in their head. This is nonsense. This is absolutely nonsense. Inspiration is at best half of the job. If you're just waiting around for the right inspiration to strike, you're never going to get anything done. You need to put in the time and effort to learn the craft of the art you're creating, and that applies to RP as any others. Art is a craft. It can be learned. Even if you have this great idea for a story, you still need to learn how to write a good sentence, how to create, a tension curve, how to, just expand your vocabulary. You need practice. You need to learn the craft. And now I know there are some people that will, for example, say, "Oh, but what about Mozart? Mozart wrote his first symphony when he was 13, so obviously there's genius there, right? He didn't need any of this." Well, here's a fact. It is true that Mozart did write his first symphony when he was 13, but he started to be taught music when he was 3. So even Mozart needed 10 years of practice until he could master his art. So what's your excuse? One tip I can give you, especially if you're kind of new to this all, is that you really have to find a balance between novelty and what is known to work. Now, I'm, for example, somebody who's very guilty of trying to be too novel. I come up with really crazy and out there ideas. I'm like, wow, guys, we're going to try this, and I have no idea if this is going to work. And it can be fun, that's how you find. If art was always the same, it would be unbearably boring. But sometimes, it's good to stick to what is known to work. I mean, it's known to work for a good reason. Especially if you're new, lean more towards what is known to work. Take the tropes and story arcs that are classics. They're classics for a reason, because they work. Now, here's a little exercise I would like to give you if you want to train your creativity. It's very simple. Whenever you consume a piece of art, whether this is a book, a movie, or whatever, ask yourself some of the following questions. Did I like this? Why or why not? Which elements worked? Which one didn't? How could this have been improved to make it better? Do this after every single time you consume any kind of media. And really look for answers. Don't just brush it off. Really think. Why did I like this? What about this hit me emotionally? If you train your critical thinking of thinking about art, you will get a lot better and see patterns and new ways to tell your own stories, whether through RP or any other, but it applies to RP just as well as any other art. Now, let's keep going to being a player. Here are some tips for you players out there. Never get too attached to a character. Now this, okay, I'm already hearing laughter in the audience, so you know what I'm talking about. Now, oops, excuse me. This is, it might seem obvious to some people, but your character is not you. If someone insults your character in the story, that doesn't mean the person is insulting you. The same way, if character death in many games can be a thing, and that can make some people pretty upset. So always be aware ahead of time if your GM plans on including stuff like character death or disfigurement or something like that. Now, this is not an invitation for GMs to be a dick about it. In general, I would actually not recommend having character death at all, especially if you're an inexperienced game group. It tends to just be kind of lame and just not as fun. It can be fantastic if done correctly, but that usually takes some experience and the right kind of writing. Less is more. I can't state this enough. Especially as a new player, keep things simple. There is this myth that, oh, well, if I just make things larger and more complicated, it becomes better. That is absolutely not the case. More just tends to be bloating and just annoying. Like I don't want to sit through your 30-page character story. I don't. None of us do. We don't have the time for that. Keep things simple. The way I would recommend, especially for new players, is take a simple archetype, like the big dumb warrior with a heart of gold, or the bumbling wizard who is easily distracted, and then give him a twist. Give him a little twist, have a little idea, maybe an interesting little backstory, something, or a couple quirks, whatever, and then let your character develop through the game. This is usually better development than you could write on your own anyways, because it will be personalized to the story that you are telling. Context matters. This is General Angry McCurbstomp. He's always angry, and he likes to curb stomp people. Is he a bad character? Well, the answer is, it depends. In a deep, politically based RPing game, of course this character would be ridiculous and completely inappropriate. But if we're just playing a goofy, silly, kill all Xeno scum campaign, he might be a fantastic character. It's often more important to make a character that fits the setting than one that is written particularly well. So always talk with your game master and your fellow players about how you can incorporate your character into the setting. Here are some tropes to avoid. Of course, okay, here's the caveat. Yes, every single of these tropes can be done right. You could do it right. There are writers that have done it fantastically, but just as a general warning, especially for new players, these are stuff you probably should avoid. First one, tragic backstories. Now look, this can be done very well, yes, I know, but it's a very overdone trope. And especially at the table, it very rarely adds something. It just makes the character more annoying and mopey. It's usually not worth it. Amnesia. I mean, do I have to say anything? This is like the laziest backstory you can give someone. This is just a blank card for, well, my character is very interesting and I can add later anything that I want. It's lazy. Don't do it. Uncooperative characters. Now, this is especially important in pen and paper games. No one likes the one guy who every time the Dungeon Master calls for adventure says, no, I'm not going, I won't do that, I'm gonna go do something else. No one, don't be that guy. No one wants to do that. That's no fun. It's no fun to have a character that will never go along with the fun. Your character should be, to some degree, cooperative. Excessively cool characters. Now, this is, again, I guess it's something that could be do right. But in general, if at some point in your character description the word cool appears unironically, you should probably rethink. Just don't do it. And finally, any and all kinds of mental illness. This is a pet peeve of mine. This is a big pet peeve of mine. Dungeon Master, Game Masters of the world, you should probably just straight up ban characters from having mental illnesses. And this includes stuff like demon possession, because really, it detracts the worst kinds of writing and is generally just used as a cheap shortcut to make a character more interesting and often annoying. Real mental illness is very difficult, it's painful, and it's awkward. And generally these characters can even be very insulting and sensitive towards people with real mental illnesses. So please avoid. This is a big pet peeve of mine. On Mary Sue's. Now, I take this audience probably mostly knows what a Mary Sue is, but in case you don't know, you should definitely look it up to learn what to avoid. So obviously, avoid is like the plague. A Mary Sue is basically a character that is too perfect. Everyone loves them, they're so powerful, no one ever defeats them, they're perfect in every single way, etc., etc. Obviously, avoid like the plague. But there is one interesting thing I would like to say about this. Be aware that this is something I've noticed. Many, especially new players, actually create these characters accidentally. What I think happens is, players who have never really written a character before, they don't really know where to start. So what they go what seems the most interesting. Now, okay, I want to make an example. Just imagine, you were a person in a fantasy world, you were in a fantasy world or whatever, you were an actual in-game person. And now you meet the following two characters, a down-to-earth farmer who has lost his farm and is now on his way to town to find a way to feed his family, or a flaming death biker from hell who is on his mission to kill God with his double flaming katanas. Okay, which one of those characters is more interesting? Not better, but more interesting. Well, as much as it pains me to say, the flaming katana guy. That is more interesting technically, but that doesn't mean they're a better character. And I've seen this quite a lot, actually, is that you should be tolerant of inexperienced players. They come to your table with a bad character. Often, they don't actually realize they're doing this. They're just trying their best to create an interesting character. So don't immediately dismiss them. Try to give them some advice. Some of the best players I have played with started with horrendous characters. It's just the most cringe-worthy stuff you've ever heard. And after sitting down and just explaining why it was cringe-worthy and giving some examples of what might be better, they improved a lot. So, moving on, let's talk about being a GM. I have quite a lot to say on this. The very, very, very most important thing about this all is your players' fun is your fun. And this is the heart of what it means to be a game master. Your players are not here to entertain you. If anything, they are here for you to entertain them. This is the most important thing to understand. Your players having fun should always be your main goal. Always. Nothing else matters. If your players are having fun, you are doing good. Doesn't matter how you accomplish that fun. It doesn't matter if it's high writing skills or if it's just stupid fun. If you guys are having fun, you're doing it right. Never, never, ever, ever become a GM because you want power. I've sadly seen this happen. Is that there will be GMs with inflated self-worth that will think, they'll have power over their players. They can control them, use them to tell the story they want to. Your players are not your servant. This can only end in disaster. Don't do this. If you think you want power and that's why you want to become a GM, you should really rethink if you want to be a GM. Another important thing is being good doesn't really matter, really. It doesn't. It just doesn't. You're having fun with your friends, hanging out, you're being goofy. It doesn't matter if you're a great author, if you're a great voice actor, if you're a great actor in general. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that you and your players are having fun. People come to RPGs for texture, not for polish. We don't come here expecting a AAA blockbuster movie perfectly polished down to every single degree, everything perfect. No, we expect a fun, goofy time with our friends with some bumps here and there. That's part of the fun. All that matters is that you guys are having fun, period. Now, this is something I make very clear whenever someone joins my table. When you join my table, you leave your political, religious, sexual, whatever identities at the doorstep. At my table, we're together to play a game. We're not here to talk about these kind of topics. And I would really recommend this, especially if you don't know your players that well. There might be, people you've been meeting for the first time. Now, of course, you can include topics like this at your table and in your adventures. But let's just say you've been warned. Now, players vary surprisingly widely. Like really, they really do. One of your most important jobs as a GM is that you have to figure out your players' tastes and appeal to them whenever possible. But often, players, even the ones at the same table, can have extremely opposite tastes of what they think makes a story good or a game fun. I mean, I've had players that just love to talk. They'll talk and talk and talk. They'll talk to all the NPCs. They'll be in the front of the group. They'll have a great time, whatever. And I have other PCs that will literally say 2 sentences in the entire evening and be perfectly happy with that. They don't want to talk more. That's just what they want to do. And again, it's fine. Whatever it is you want, that's fine. You as a Dungeon Master should be aware of this and try your best to appeal to them. Usually, no one in particular should be in the spotlight. You shouldn't try to appeal to one person too much, but sometimes it is worth it. Sometimes it's worth to really highlight, really make something just for one player. and the others will probably be mature enough to take a step back and then wait for their spot in the limelight. Here's one of the best pieces of advice I have personally ever gotten. It's from a pretty obscure 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons book called Heroes of Horror, which, as the name implies, talks about some pretty gruesome stuff. And roughly paraphrased, what it said in the first chapter for the Dungeon Master advice was, Dungeons & Dragons is a game. It's supposed to be fun. If any player is feeling uncomfortable for any reason, stop. Now, this is a very powerful piece of advice for several reasons. The most important one, I think, is for any reason. It doesn't matter why the player's feeling comfortable. It doesn't matter if you agree with them feeling comfortable. The only important thing is that they're feeling comfortable, you've crossed the line. They're not having fun anymore. And remember, that's the most important thing. You can make a character feel uncomfortable. Often you have to. For horror or drama, a character has to feel uncomfortable sometimes. And that can be very fun. But you're not allowed to make a player uncomfortable. That's a very important distinction. You've gone too far, take a break, think it through, communicate. On that topic, horror is hard. Making an RPG scary is really difficult. You're sitting around with your friends, goofy, in a room, eating chips. It's not a very scary environment to be in. Now, this can work if everyone takes it extremely seriously. You probably will have to ban almost all off-topic jokes and banters. If you do this and everyone's into it, it can be great fun. I've done it before. It can really work, but everyone really has to take it very seriously. But I definitely wouldn't recommend it for new groups. Maybe some groups that want to try something new. Speaking of hard, comedy is harder. Comedy is really hard to do right. In general, I mean in movies or in anywhere else, but especially in pen and paper, it can be really hard. It really quickly devolves into unfunny slapstick. You can't really do visual humor to a large degree. I mean, you can do descriptions, but that often doesn't work to the same degree. And getting timing right can be really difficult. As one of the greatest video game journalists of all time once said, ironically, it takes a lot of care to appear carefree. And that's my point. You can make comedy work. Again, I've done it before. I've seen it happen. My advice would be you have to be prepared very, very, very carefully. You have to really rehearse your jokes and be careful that you have backups in case something goes wrong. Again, something for advanced groups, people who have experience. Time travel. No. Now, on the topic of things to not do, you probably should not do romance. Now, art can be anything, blah, blah, blah. Many of the greatest works of art of all time were inspired by love and romance and whatever. But people are weird about the boys and the girls. This is just a fact. We are all kind of weird to some degree about this. Some of us more, some of us less. This is probably a can of worms you do not want to open. Now, this applies to sexuality and all that kind of stuff to the same degree. Now, of course, you can do this if you really want to, but you have been warned. Here's a really, really powerful sentence that I've learned over the years to encourage manageable characters. If you don't want to restrict too much what your players are allowed to play, here's something I can really recommend. Tell them the following. You can play any character you want, but they must be, at heart, a genuinely good person. This makes it more manageable because, of course, good people are easier to control. You know, they'll actually help if someone calls for it, and it greatly encourages creative thinking. Because you have to think about, well, what does it mean to be genuinely good? Can you be kind of an asshole but still be a genuinely good person? Probably. Constraints are good. There is this myth around about absolute freedom. Having an absolutely free game is the best thing you can accomplish. This is a pipe dream. Don't even start. Constraints make you creative. And not only that, lack of constraints leads to all the problems that we saw in the central problem of RPGs. So don't let people tell you otherwise. Here's my most powerful sentence to keep your stories on track. If at some point you feel a character is doing something wrong, it's messing with your story, here is one of the most powerful sentences that I can recommend using. I don't think your character would do that. Now, this is a lot better than, for example, just telling them, no, you can't do that, or no, I won't allow that, because it opens a dialogue. Instead of just denying something, you're asking them, well, how can we work together to create something that would fit the story better? Of course, it only works if the character would actually not do that, which again is why I encourage creating good or manageable characters usually. Use it sparingly. If you use it too often, you may seem very controlling. The rule of cool. Now, in my opinion, this should be called the rule of good storytelling, but the rule of cool sounds better. Basically, it just says, sometimes it's best just forget about the rules, forget about the dice, and just do what's coolest. This has to be done in moderation, but is absolutely essential for a good experience. Don't follow the rules to the T. Sometimes, you just want to do something really cool, you roll some dice, just go for it, just do it. But don't do it too often. If you do it too often, why do you have rules at all? It's an art like any other. You're just going to have to learn it through experience. But always keep in mind that the rules can and should be sometimes broken. Use music. Get a good speaker. I cannot recommend this highly enough. It makes a huge difference, even if it's just a little soundtrack, that a little woods noises or some battle music, it doesn't matter. My recommendations here is avoid music with vocals. It tends to be very distracting. And in fantasy games, avoid music that sounds new or uses synths to a large degree. This is also tends, but that might just be my taste. I personally really dislike it. Fudging rolls. Here's a little bit of a controversial topic, kind of. What fudging rolls is basically, as a game master, you roll some dice, but you don't accept the result. You instead substitute with something else. Now, I am a huge fan of this. I absolutely think you should do this. But you should do it right. The first thing is, make sure your players know that you plan on fudging dice occasionally. If you pull it out of nowhere, it can feel like cheating. Always fudge in favor of the players, or if you do, hide it well. And don't overdo it. If you overdo it and you keep denying rolls, just picking what happens, why are you rolling at all? You're taking away one of the best aspects of role-playing games, the chaos, the spontaneity, the surprises. What I can say is, embrace the chaos, but don't submit to it. Now, here, I want to say a little thing about game feel. Now, this is especially for newer players, that just want to have a good time with their friends. Your game may look like this. That could be the case, but it probably shouldn't feel like this. Moody and dark, kind of maybe complicated, intimidating. It probably shouldn't. Your game should probably feel more like this. With this being your players here. You guys should have fun. There's a good reason that most pen and paper games and role-playing games in general tend to have a very action and adventure focus. It's because it works. It's really fun to kill a big monster, to go on an epic adventure and to have stuff explode. It's fun. It works. It's a good time. And you shouldn't look down on that as simple pleasures. I hate that. No, you can make a fantastic story about really goofy and fun stuff. And those are probably going to be the memories that actually stick with you. Now, being a pony. I'm just going to say a couple things here. I could talk about this for quite a while, but there is, 2 or 3 big things I would like to talk about. Now, there is the biggest problem, in my opinion, about playing a pony. Again, you can do anything you want. If you want to play a game about ponies, and I assume a lot of people here do, that is perfectly fine. I don't think you have to justify yourself to anybody. There's nothing wrong with that. But there is one question that you should ask yourself when you create such a game. But why are they ponies? Because I want to is a fine reason, don't get me wrong. But if you create a game that is about ponies, you will strongly limit your player base. This is just true. Ponies aren't for everybody. I mean, here, probably they are for most people, but in the wider world, many people will be very turned off. It's not their thing. So you have to ask yourself, is it worth restricting myself to that degree and excluding those players that might be interested in playing my game? You will also inherit a lot of baggage from the setting, about stuff you see in the show and your players asking, well, in this one episode, that thing happened, so can't I do that too? This can be difficult to handle. It could be something good, it might be something you want, but it can be a problem as well. The real question is that if you can tell the same story, if it's just about the characters or the stories, why not tell the same story with humans? I don't know. Now, of course, I'm being a little bit of a hypocrite here, since the best pony game I have ever played had absolutely no reason whatsoever to be ponies, and we did it anyways because it was fun and I had a great time. So take it with a grain of salt. It's more important to have a good story than being able to justify why it is a good story. The second big problem is conflict resolution in the My Little Pony universe. What I mean by this is, almost all pen and paper rule sets focus very heavily on combat. And obviously, it's a show meant for little girls, even so we like to pretend sometimes it isn't, is not very into fighting and violence and stuff. That's not really a big part of the deal. And the problem is, if the only thing you have is a hammer, well, then everything looks like a nail. If all you have is a combat system, then everything looks like a fight. So to address this problem, you need to do one of 3 things. You're either going to have a really good GM who's really good at improvising non-violent solutions to the various situation you come into. You're going to have to change the setting, which is, for example, how the system Pony Finder does it. It goes very far from show canon, changes a lot. I would probably recommend it to people that like very wide-ranging fan fictions, for example. Or use a completely different system that is focused on this kind of gameplay. This is, for example, how Tales of Equestria does it, which is a system I wish we had more time to talk about. I have quite a lot of opinions on it. But, okay, the final problem I would like to talk about with MLP is race imbalances. This is just true, is some races are unequivocally better than the others in every way. There's just no way around this. Now, if you want your players to be able to play different races, which you probably do, you have to keep this in mind. You can either make the strong ones weaker or make the weak ones stronger. Weakening the strong ones tends to be lame. No one likes taking away cool stuff. If you want to play a Pegasus, you want to fly. That's why you're playing the goddamn Pegasus. Don't take that away from me, Game Master. But this can still be a problem because you would then have to strengthen the weak ones, and you probably will have to strengthen them to such ridiculous degrees that it really doesn't make much sense. You should also, just a little tip, you should probably allow non-unicorns to be spellcasters. This is a pet peeve of mine, you can ignore this, but I really hate this. I want to play out the characters and cast spells too, come on. One more thing I'd like to talk about this is that this problem actually gets worse. There is an even worse problem here. Not only are they imbalanced, many of the races have abilities that I like to call universally a pain in the ass, or UPA. Now, I like to divide this into two groups, Code Red and Code Yellow. Code Red are abilities that will always mess with you in your story if you're not specifically prepared for them. These include stuff such as flight and teleportation. You can see why this would be a problem. Code Yellow are abilities that can totally mess with your story depending on how powerful they are within the setting. These are stuff like telekinesis, shapeshifting, and mind control. Now, you can of course give your players these abilities, but you have to think about how they will affect it. Does it make sense to have picture IDs if there are people that can shapeshift? Is it sensical to have a wall around your castle if people can fly? Is it sensical to have roads if you can teleport, or doors for that matter? Maybe a unicorn castle doesn't have any doors. Would be a lot safer, wouldn't it? It's a really great way to add some flavor to your setting, make it stand out a bit. Or just something to keep in mind to avoid headache. Now, this was a lot. This was quick, I know. Sadly, we only have this little time here together today. So this had to go a little bit quickly. I'm so sorry about it. Again, the offer still stands. Buy me a couple of drinks, I'll talk to you all night. But now I'd like to slow down for one more minute and say something that's pretty important to me. I know a lot of this that I've been talking about, it could seem maybe, especially to new players, it could seem a little complicated, intimidating, maybe even scary. It might seem like I'm trying to discourage people and this kind of stuff. But I want to make clear that it's absolutely not what I'm trying to do here. The opposite, in fact. It's my favorite hobby. I love role-playing games. I really do. And I hope that someday you can love them as much as I do, if you don't already. Now, like any other social activity, or rather, let me put it this way. I would like to call back to the beginning of this talk, where I briefly mentioned that RP is something very natural, something very human. It's something very social, and it's just plain fun. It's really fun. And like this fantastic ad for Dungeons & Dragons puts it, if you're going to be sitting in your basement pretending to be an elf, you might as well have some friends over to help. And I think this perfectly encapsulates, to a large degree, why I love role-playing games. It's a very social thing, and we're social animals, each and every one of us. We're social. We love hanging out with our friends. And this is such a great way to spend time with your friends, to be creative. And now I know, probably better than many, that role-playing can be hard, can be difficult, can be awkward, annoying, sometimes even disastrous. But when it works, it can leave you with amazing, fun memories and friends that you will cherish for the rest of your life. And I don't think you can put a price on that. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this was good. Thank you so much. I'd like to give a little, I hope it was good. If it was bad, don't tell me. Let me live my dream of actually being good at something in my life. I would like to give a thank you to my friend Chelsea, who helped me with the visuals of the presentation, or in other words, did the visuals in the presentation. Couldn't have done it without you. Thank you so much. I'd also give a little shout out to a special group of friends that I've only recently been able to talk to again. You know who you are. Love you all, you weirdos. All right, so we still have a little bit of time for questions. So, yeah, go ahead. Sure, go ahead. I'm not saying it's a good. I'm saying I do not recommend it. Oh, okay. Okay, I know what you're talking. Okay, so basically, the argument was that I shouldn't be looking down on an unstructured RP because it'd be a great character and such. I agree with that, but here's the thing. I might have not put this very well, but I wouldn't necessarily agree that what you are saying you're playing is necessarily unstructured. Unstructured really means you have no idea what the hell you're doing. You have no plan, there's no setting, there's no plot. If you say to your friends, hey guys, let's play ponies in Equestria, that for me is structure already. It's not much structure, but it is a structure.
Either it ends up being characters randomly interacting, but there are sort of conventions, I guess, or it'll be a GM who has some idea of a story, but there isn't usually rules and dice and things like that.
Yes, I will count that as structured RP for my. I mean, the moment you have a GM, anyways. So structure does not mean rules or dice or numbers. It just means you all have a communicated vision, not just you're writing in some direction without a plan. That's what I meant by that. So, but yes, I agree. I have had great games like that myself. So I do agree. Yes?
I was wondering what you think about Skype roleplay or those kind of things, from computer to computer instead of sitting together in a room.
Yeah, so I actually have a lot to say about that. I had a whole chapter on this in the original version of this talk, which was 2 hours long, so I obviously couldn't do that. There's a lot I could say about Skype role-playing and stuff. In short, this is one of them. The short I can give is, if you play over webcam, it's almost not different at all to normal pen and paper from my experience. You still see each other, you talk, it's not very different. Playing over voice is slightly different because you don't see each other emoting. This can lead to problems, for example, that people can't really talk over each other, and this can get confusing. So we can sometimes slow things down a bit, but it does work. It does work. Text. Now, pure text with nothing else, is an entirely different story. Text is great. I love text RP, but it's very different from other kinds of RP. The way I would put it is, first of all, you need way more time to do it, a lot more time. And I would say it potentiates almost everything about RP. RP over text tends to be, well, let's say, I hate saying this, but kind of higher quality because people have more time to think. If you're sitting at your table, goofing around, you don't really think about your character that much. But if you have to sit down and wait 10 minutes for the other guy to write, you have time to think about, what is my character feeling? What am I seeing? How will I react to it? How will I compose my sentences? So often, over text, RPs become more in the best and worst ways. It can also happen, I've seen this before, the internet is known for attracting some weird people. They can also lead to volatile group compositions and strange people that you may never wanted to play with if you met them face to face, but because it's over text, you give them the benefit of the doubt. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I've met actually many of my best friends in exactly that fashion. It's just worth keeping in mind. I personally recommend, if you want to avoid drama, you should probably at least talk to them with voice at least a little bit, at least occasionally, so that you know they're not weird, if that makes any sense. But I do recommend it if you have the time and the energy to do it. All right, back there.
Any tips on how I would go about finding a group?
Great. Actually, great that you mentioned that. I did have a thing to talk about this, but I had to cut it because of time, so great that I can talk about it now. Basically, there is no silver bullet, but what I can say is the following. Finding groups online, there are websites specifically for this kind of stuff like roll20.net and a couple of others. I don't have much experience with these kind of things, and from secondhand experience, I can tell you from friends I've tried that they often aren't very reliable, especially people disappearing after a couple times, or just not finding a group that's up to your standards, unless you spend the time getting into the community, meeting people and such. The one tip I can give you about finding a group, especially in real life, is groups tend to spring up around a GM nucleus, so to speak. If you're a player looking for a GM, you're probably out of luck. But if you're a GM looking for a player, you would be surprised how many people will come out of the woodwork and say, well, actually, it sounds kind of like fun. You can ask friends you already know. You can, well, actually, another thing worth mentioning, if you live in a bigger city that has a hobby game store, and stuff like wargaming and stuff, very many of them actually have weekly or bi-weekly or whatever pen and paper sessions that basically anyone can join. Or at least have like boards where you can put up looking for players or looking for GMs or similar to that. But in general, my tip is, if you don't have a lot of friends around you that might be interested in this kind of stuff that you already know, or you're willing to put the work into finding such people, which there's no way for, no easy way for, you're probably going to have to bite the bullet and become a GM. That would be my advice.
Well, first off, I want to say good presentation. I haven't been really that much into role-playing games before, but I thought this was really interesting. And I wanted to ask something about the things you said, that you should avoid things like romance or politics in your RPs. But what if you do this deliberatively? For example, what if you get together with a group of friends and say, you know what, wouldn't it be fun if instead of fighting monsters, we are constantly romancing them and each other?
Yeah, okay, first of all, that's weird, but again, art has no rules. That's my answer. Art has no rules. That can absolutely be done right. Everything can be done right. The weirdest, out of the way, unconventional idea can be done right, but that doesn't mean it's easy. And I'm trying to give practical advice to you. You can create a story like that is fantastic. Some of my great experience have been about politics and like touchy subjects like that. But everyone has to be on board. Again, art has no rules, but you have a responsibility. That's what it comes down to. If all your players are on board with it, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just they have to be on board with it. And yeah, that's not always easy. Depends on the group. Right. There.
What kind of dice do you think is the best? Just a simple coin flip, D6, or even a D100?
I would say that, personally, I'm just extremely nostalgic for Dungeons & Dragons. I grew up with Dungeons & Dragons. I play Dungeons & Dragons every week. I love it. So I have a big love for the D20. It's just, I don't know, it might just be nostalgia, but I feel it's just the perfect size. It's just you have the really low rolls for some funny moments. You have the really high rolls for some really awesome moments, and lots of chaos in between. In general, it really just depends on what system you're playing. The one thing worth mentioning is the difference between uniform distributed dice and Gaussian distributed dice, which basically means the difference between rolling a d20 and rolling 3d6. The difference is, on a d20, you have the same chance to get any of the numbers on the die, but if you roll 3d6 and add them together, you have a much higher chance of getting average rolls and a much lower chance of getting high or low rolls. This is much more realistic. If you're into realistic games, which again is fine, you should probably look into stuff like throwing 3d6. But from my experience, stuff like 1d20, uniform dice, are much more fun because it's more chaotic. It's way more fun to have some really awesome or some really bad moments than having lots of okay moments. All right, anyone else? Over there?
Yes, maybe that's okay.
No, give it to him so everyone can hear.
Yes, I just wanted to add something to him about romantic stuff. Maybe if you agree that you can try to find the right system which has rules for this kind of stuff, maybe that you can look out in these directions.
Well, of course. A system is tools. If you have the right system for the right game, it will make it easier. Otherwise, you need a really good GM to improvise. So, yeah. Anyone else? I thought I saw up. One more there.
So, I have two questions for you. The first is, if I have one character, but with the system for battle, the rule battle is not is difficult to create this character. The better is avoid this character who tried the fit the
Okay, so I think the question is, if it's hard to create the character you want to play in the system, should you try to avoid the character? Is that right?
yes.
Okay, yeah. I would say it really depends on how good that character is. If it's a really great character and he's really like essential for the game you're trying to play and stuff, and everyone's cool with it, I would recommend. Well, first of all, you can always bend the rules. You can just add some new stuff. Like recently, in one of my groups, a character wanted to play an archetype of character, like a drunken brawler, and there was no rule for that in the game. So I just created some for fun. So you can definitely do that. But here's a little caveat. Often characters that are hard to make in the system usually mean they're not necessarily fit the setting. That can happen. And as I said before, context matters. So just keep that in mind. If it's a good character, it's worth bending the rules, but it should be worth it.
And my second question is, you said no politics in the table, but in the script of the game master, it's possible to do a script for politics. The character is
Okay.
to choose between two empires.
When I talk politics, I don't mean literally all kinds of politics. I mean the kind that you get into fights over with your grandmother. I mean, like real life politics, stuff like, this president is better than that president, or whatever. Stuff that gets people fighting. Because it's or like, right wings are bad. Oh no, left wings are bad. It can be great. I'm not saying it's not. Again, art has no rules. You can do anything great, and politics is a great source of many great stories. But you should be aware that people can be very touchy about that, so it's often not worth it. But within the setting, especially if it's like fantasy politics, the one kingdom, it has an intrigue against the other one. No, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's usually very fun. Awesome. Do we still have time? I'd love to.
What would you, excuse me, what do you do normally with overpowering characters over development? Because you said teleportation, for example, is overpowered, but you start not at Twilight the Princess, but one unicorn like Rarity who can't cast any spells besides levitation.
Yeah. Especially Yupa abilities are tricky because you have to consider not just your party, but also the world in general. It might be that your party, for example, does not have a unicorn that can cast a teleportation spell, which is probably a good idea if you're running a low-level campaign. But it is worth considering, well, if there are unicorns that can cast teleportation, what does it mean for the world? Why would we have trade caravans if we could just teleport valuable stuff from one city to the next? Shouldn't there be stuff like that? You don't have to do that, of course. You can just kind of ignore it. But it's a really great way to add some flavor to your setting. It becomes difficult when it falls into the player's hands, as I said it would. And you'd be surprised, even like a really weak teleportation. Like if you can only teleport literally 1 foot, just 1 foot, nothing else, and it's really hard to do, and it's not reliable. It doesn't seem that powerful, but I can teleport through walls with that. And that changes a lot of how dungeons work. Like if I want to break into a place and I can just teleport through a wall, that makes it a lot easier. And that's what I mean by universally a pain in the ass, is that your players will find ways to mess with your story with those kinds of abilities. You'll just have to keep that in mind. Like for example, that's why a lot of Dungeons & Dragons, campaigns are set underground or in dungeons, because then you can't really fly. Because at high levels, Dungeons & Dragons characters can very often fly. So to counteract that, you can just put them into a dungeon and they can't fly. Or you can have monsters that can also fly, or monsters that can shoot, or monsters that can, throw a net or whatever. I don't have a general solution. I could talk about this for hours, literally. I have a lot of things to say about this, but in general, it's just something you have to keep in the back of your mind. All right. Well, that'll be it then. Thank you very much, everybody.